Marvel's Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4 sets the tone from its opening moment and manages to consistently uphold an atmosphere of cinematic grandeur throughout its approximate 30-hour playtime. Although the pacing is prone to falter during the game's final hours, Spider-Man takes the pillars that have built up the modern superhero genre and adapts them to craft a near-perfect experience of what Insomniac Games envisages a contemporary Spider-Man game to be. The first minutes of Spider-Man serve as an excellent introduction to Insomniac's entry to the Marvel Universe. As the camera pans over family photos of Aunt May and Uncle Ben, sketches and blueprints for Spidey gadgets and newspaper clippings of the criminal Spider-Man's put away during his career, it's made strikingly clear that this story will not be retreading the now well-worn path of Spider-Man's origin story once again. Peter Parker is 23. He's been Spider-Man for 8 years now, and although the classic story beat of trying to balance his Spidey-Parker life ratio rears its head, it's evident that this version of Spider-Man is reasonably well experienced. With the upbeat tune of Alive by the Warbly Jet accompanying the visual of Spider-Man leaping through his open window, the game thrusts control of the physics-based web swinging directly into the hands of the player, and it's hard not to crack a smile at how well the package all comes together. It's a novelty that hardly wears off as the game progresses. Every ounce of visual throughout is layered with a thick cinematic veneer that seems to suit every situation that the story manages to touch during its course. Emotional moments between critical characters feel meaningful with excellent line delivery from voice actors and motion capture that looks incredible with the highly detailed model and texture work that's gone into both the character and world design. Combined with Insomniac's impressive per-pixel motion blur setting, Spider-Man is up there as one of the best looking games this generation, especially when running on the PS4 Pro at a super sampled 4K and a steady 30 frames per second. The audio design deserves a special acknowledgement. As you leap from your perch above the rooftops of Manhattan and plummet towards the streets below, the wind rushes past your ears and the orchestral soundtrack begins to swell. Pressing in the right trigger to commence your swing is met with a weighty squelch as a web connects with the building, closely followed with a sharp zip as the web disconnects and Spidey traverses into his next move. Combining those with additional sound effects like the sonic boom created when point launching, assist in creating a rhythm that's almost therapeutic to listen to and aids in keeping the world traversal fresh and engaging. Other small details in the audio design contribute to the massive appreciation for craftsmanship that's gone into creating this game. For example, Spider-Man has 2 sets of voice lines recorded for when he's talking on the phone to other leading characters. One for when he's sat stationary, sounding more at ease, and another for while he's swinging through the city streets, sounding a little strained and out of breath. It's details like these that ground the characters within the world and make the experience that much more believable.
Anytime you want to talk, just call.
In promotional material released prior to Spider-Man's launch, Insomniac Games made it clear that they believe the best Spider-Man stories occur when both Peter Parker's and Spider-Man's worlds collide. Running with this idea has paid off, with Insomniac delivering a well-paced story that deals with themes that are surprising in their maturity. It's certainly not as gritty as Marvel's Netflix show counterpart, but it's more tongue-in-cheek than cinema-goers of Marvel's Hollywood blockbusters would expect. This unexpected tonal shift was welcome, as it heightened the expectation of what could come next, making the twists and turns of the story beat moderately unpredictable and surprising. This version of Peter Parker serves as a fantastic lens through which to view the story. As he's 23 and a young adult when we join the events, we get to witness his attempt to manage a healthy adult life alongside his crime-fighting persona. Working a job, paying the rent, helping family and maintaining relationships are just a few of the normal life activities Peter has to manage. Just like some people might use going to the gym, playing a video game or reading a book as their downtime, we get to see Peter utilise his work as Spider-Man for his. So because being Spider-Man is what Peter does for fun, that dynamic directly translates to the player via his upbeat attitude and quick-fire quips, automatically making the simple act of playing as Spider-Man infinitely more enjoyable to experience. The first 2 acts of the story progress at a healthy pace as Peter teams up with Mary Jane Watson, now an accomplished journalist, and Yuri Watanabe, Spidey's inside contact at the NYPD, to uncover a meticulous plot to convey a significant terrorist attack within New York City. Along the way, Spider-Man crosses paths with numerous villains and their accompanying factions, with mission structures ranging from simple brawler types to slower, more methodical stealth reconnaissance. What's impressive about these missions is their consequences on the open world as the story goes on. Uncovering a new faction will result in radiant crime quests generating while traversing across Manhattan, and these repercussions become more extravagant as the game goes on, evolving the world from one of relative leisure to one that's more dangerous to exist in. This makes sense from a narrative perspective as well as gameplay. The added challenge to traversing the world provides valuable downtime outside of story missions for the player to become more familiar with Spider-Man's moveset. Although the third and final act becomes more predictable with regards to its story beats, it's impressive in how Insomniac have been able to use the colliding worlds of Peter Parker and Spider-Man to craft villains whose motives and emotions feel genuinely understandable. Perceiving the same characters through the perspective of Peter Parker as well as Spider-Man for an extended period allows for the villains to exhibit human attributes and grounds them in a way that helps the player to connect with them on a more intimate level. This bond is developed over the course of the first 2 acts and is paid off well in the third and final act with a finale that most will find astonishingly heart-wrenching. The story overall is fantastic. It tells a tale that's necessarily dark while leaving breathing room for the charming comedy and light-hearted fun of classic Spider-Man. It also props open the door for potential future sequels. As you would expect in a Spider-Man game, most of your time here will be spent with your feet firmly off the ground as you swing from building to building using the physics-based web swinging. Holding in the right trigger will initiate a web swing, while pressing X at the height of the swing will see Spider-Man gain a significant speed boost in the forwards direction. The player is then able to combine that with other moves like a web zip, useful for quick direction changes or for when at a height above buildings, the point launch that drags Spider-Man to a specific point and then launches him into the air, vertical and horizontal wall runs, as well as shortcuts for quickly rounding the corners of buildings. Most of these moves are available from the start of the game, with a few only a couple of skill points away in the unlock tree. However, there is a learning curve to chaining these moves together in a way that feels natural. It's one that's intuitive though, and before long, you'll get a feel for when to leave a swing to get the right height and distance for each situation you're in, and for what move to chain afterwards. Add in a percentage speed boost that's rewarded for reaching certain level up milestones, and by the end of the game it's clear to see a significant amount of progression in your ability to master control of Spider-Man, a level of progress that is most rewarding due to it being entirely natural. At its core, web swinging feels like a well-executed rhythm game combined with elements of stunt sports games like SSX or Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. The visceral experience of chaining together moves is a traversal method that is so engaging it's often favourable to fast travel. If you aren't swinging across the open world, you'll be fighting in it. Spider-Man's combat system takes the tried and tested free-flow combat that's been iterated upon for nearly a decade and elevates it to new heights, literally. On top of the timed pressing of square to throw punches, Spider-Man can also use his webs to pull enemies towards him or shoot himself towards them. He can dodge in a direction, dodge underneath enemies, dodge onto a wall into a launch attack, dodge at the perfect time to initiate a counterattack, and more. This ground combat is then expanded upon when you introduce aerial combat into the mix, with each of the ground combos giving access to a whole different set of moves while in the air. Combine all of that with an arsenal of gadgets, and by the end of the game, Spider-Man's combat systems begin to resemble sandbox-like qualities that come close to rivaling the likes of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The variety of enemy types within each faction means that some attacks won't work for certain enemies, which seriously encourages experimentation with all of the moves available to Spider-Man and can result in the discovery of methods that are surprisingly effective in the right situation. These methods often aren't taught by a tutorial, which makes discovering them organically feel all the more rewarding, further empowering that sense of progression as a player that's much more substantial than a superficial percentage completion bar. While stealth is present in the game, it's certainly not a playstyle that I found myself leaning into. Spider-Man can traverse a series of rooftops or steel frame girders to suspend enemies from silently. and he can quietly take down guards using a button press attack from behind or with the tripwire gadget. But aside from a few mandatory missions, stealth gameplay mostly ends up transpiring into a fist fight at some point anyway. With a simple UI to tell the player whether it's safe to attack or not, players looking for a more in-depth stealth system similar to the Predator sequences showcased in the Batman Arkham games will want to look elsewhere. Stealth does play a more significant role in some of the main story missions in which you play as MJ and Miles Morales. In these missions you'll be able to utilise simple lure and hacking methods to traverse a small environment. These missions prove to be a compelling change of pace during the early hours of the game, but as similar sequences occur during the hours that follow, they can begin to overstay their welcome, and you may feel an intense desire to be back in control of the wall crawler, especially when you learn that getting spotted earns you a delightful instant failure. Tying the gameplay together is a robust skill tree and suit upgrade system. Skill points are earned merely by completing actions in game to obtain XP and level up. These can then be spent in 3 separate skill trees, each focusing on stealth, combat and webbing. Each of these trees allows the player to invest in the playstyle of their choice, although the web abilities are arguably more desirable during the early hours of the game as they provide complete access to Spider-Man's arsenal of traversal methods. New suits for Spider-Man are level gated and once unlocked can be purchased using various tokens earned by completing side objectives scattered across the open world. Suits come with an accompanying power, although the powers can be mixed and matched among all of the suits, so it's possible to pursue a desired aesthetic while retaining a power with superior gameplay benefits, a welcome quality of life feature. Also, suit upgrades provide modifiers to Spider-Man's attributes like a percentage damage reduction, reduced gadget cooldown, increased XP gain and more, also unlocked via the token system. The game makes a point of directing the player in the direction of the side objectives, often refusing to continue the story until at least one side quest has been completed. Using these story breaks to achieve a healthy amount of objectives ensures that unlocks and upgrades remain plentiful, and you should hit the soft level cap of 50 right as you reach the end of the story. New York City feels alive, with officially licensed buildings appearing where they should, and impressively dense traffic and pedestrians residing on the ground. Spider-Man feels at home whether he's soaring through the air or strolling through the streets. While the world is presented fantastically, it is plagued by modern open world tropes. Detailed mapping and objectives are uncovered by climbing high towers to disable Oscorp jamming signals, reminiscent of the archaic Ubisoft formula of old. The vast number of side objectives are varied enough that they're fun to complete alongside the main story, but the sheer number of them means that the endgame will likely consist of mindless world traversal in an attempt to achieve the full 100% Platinum trophy. In a typical open world game, these would have been significant flaws. However, Marvel's Spider-Man makes up for some of that tedium by having a traversal system that, as mentioned, is incredibly fun and engaging to experience. Web swinging across Manhattan recovers the enjoyment that would otherwise be lost if travelling the world was as simple as driving or running, but the somewhat tiresome endgame is a small mark on the otherwise flawless execution that Insomniac Games has managed to achieve. Marvel's Spider-Man for the PS4 is an incredible game. With a compelling story supported by robust movement and combat systems and a stable side mission feedback loop, it falters only to a few repetitive stealth sequences and overestimation of the player's want to achieve 100% world completion. It is an absolute must-buy for any PlayStation owner, and a testament to the game's industry that completely offline narrative single-player experiences are still very much in demand.